So now I would like to ask our next speaker, Mr. Howard Dean, to take the floor. He was chairman of the Democratic Party from 2005 to 2009, and prior to that, he was governor of Vermont for 12 years.
Thank you.
You have the floor.
Thank you. I want to thank Madame Rajavi for her extraordinary leadership. I want to thank Mr. Garces for his plan, his 10-point plan. I think it's something that we need to do. Oftentimes, when I come to Europe, I come to conferences, and my favorite thing to say is that the Europeans always criticize the Americans because we always act without thinking. But of course, we also like to come to Europe because they always think without acting. Now we have less than 6 months to act. The time is now. I would concur with Madame Rajavi's views on the United States' complicity in this tragedy. In fact, the United States policy in this part of the world has been a disaster for 60 years, starting with the assassination of Prime Minister Mossadegh. Had that not happened at that time, we would not be facing what we are facing today. The United States, over the years, has learned not to assassinate democratic leaders. It was a painful lesson. But there is much we have to learn. In 2003, you may remember that I spoke out against sending our troops into Iraq. One of the reasons I said that in 2003 was that the winner of the war in Iraq between the United States and Saddam Hussein was going to be the government of Iran. And that is exactly what has happened. And the United States today has sacrificed 5,000 of our brave soldiers so that we could have an Iranian ally in the prime ministership of Iraq who is committing war crimes against innocent people who have been guaranteed safety by the United States of America. The United States government is responsible for what happens in Ashraf, and we are going to be responsible whether we say we have responsibility or not. Because of our intervention in Iraq, Nouri al-Maliki is the prime minister. And because Nouri al-Maliki is the prime minister, 34 unarmed civilians who have no crime greater than opposing the authoritarian theocracy in their homeland were murdered by people who used our training and our equipment and our looking the other way in order to commit those murders. Wesley Clark, General Wesley Clark, who was the Supreme Commander of NATO and ran for president the same year I did, recently said that I know a war crime when I see one, and this is a war crime. The Prime Minister of Iraq is now, because of the great work of Mr. Garces and others in Spain, being sought after on charges of being a war criminal. And when the Prime Minister of Iraq leaves office, as he said he will at the end of his term, he had better go back to where he spent all those years under the mullahs, because otherwise we will give him free room and board in The Hague while he attends his criminal trial for being a war criminal. Prime Minister Nour al-Maliki is a war criminal, and what happened at Ashraf is a war crime, and the United States has an obligation to do something about it. Our country must stop being on the wrong side of history in this region. We can choose the path that the Dutch chose at Srebrenica, or we can stand up for human rights. America is a great country because we have always stood for human rights. This is our chance. We have installed this Iraqi government, and we can stop the tragedy at Ashraf. Secondly, one of the excuses that Prime Minister Maliki uses for the appalling war crimes that are taking place in Ashraf is, well, that the MEK is on the terrorist list. We promised that they would be taken off the terrorists. We promised that they would be defended by the United States. They have renounced violence. They are a democratic force in a country that has no democracy of any kind. We have an obligation here. And the courts have decided everywhere, including in the United States, that the MEK is not a terrorist organization. It is time the United States caught up with the French and the British and the Spanish and the European Union and take the MEK off the terrorist list. It was put on there for political reasons. The MEK was put on the terrorist list for political reasons. Martin Indyk, who is one of the most respected diplomats in the United States and incredibly knowledgeable about the Middle East, testified 2 weeks ago in the Rohrabacher hearing that in 1997 the MEK was put on the terrorist list for one reason, not because they were terrorists, but because the United States was making an effort to reach out to the so-called moderates in the government of the mullahs, and this would help us talk to them. It is wrong to condemn 3,400 people to death 14 years later because we were wrong in 1997. The United Nations must play a role here. We do not have time to go through every single case on a case-by-case basis to decide whether each person in Ashraf is a refugee. We have less than 6 months to save these lives. And if the United Nations does not grant the residents of Ashraf refugee status as a class, then the United Nations will also bear responsibility for what's going to happen in Ashraf after January 1st. This is not a close call. This is not a difficult decision. The question is, will my government and my country stand up for what's right, or will they be politically expedient and believe the sweet cooings of a regime which has no moderates? I come from a great country. I'm very proud of my country. I don't want to have this end being less proud of my president or my country. It is very clear what has to happen. The people from Ashraf must be moved, not to another location in Iraq, which is a death sentence for those 3,400 individuals. They must be allowed to go to Europe and Canada, the United States and other countries. We, the United States military, must ensure their safety past the Iraqi army, which used to be our allies and now are human rights violators. We must do that. They must be relocated by the end of the year. We must take them off the terrorist list so there's no more ridiculous political excuse for not doing what we need to be doing. And we must stand up and call out the actions of this regime. I don't know why our government hasn't spoken up about what Maliki has done, murdering 36 innocent civilians. I don't know why our government hasn't spoken up about the fact that Iranian troops from the mullahs have invaded into Iraqi Kurdistan in order to attack people in Kurdistan. We need to go home. We don't want our troops to stay past January 1st, but let us leave Iraq with dignity and not with our tail between our legs. We have made enough mistakes in this part of the world for so long. Let's leave with pride and let us leave standing up for human rights.